We're very happy to have Simone White here as visiting artist in writing this week. We just had a very terrific multi-textured conversation in our caucus for the past couple hours. And she's going to read some work for a while, and then maybe we'll have we will have room for some Q&A after that. Let's see. This is a funny thing, you write an introduction and then you have this 2-hour conversation and you think, I got it all wrong. There's also the problem that sort of comes, like what we try to do or what we're doing in the big group conversations is to find a way to talk about the work that we're just experiencing that has so many different levels of material to it without trying to reduce it, right? So as to be anti-encapsulation as often as possible. Simone White is a poet, critic, teacher, and host/organizer when called upon of poetry readings and events rooted in various aspects of the art. Her work has appeared in Harper's, Bomb, the New York Times, eFlux, and the Brooklyn Rail, among many other places. She's taught at various schools and will be starting work at the University of Pennsylvania this fall. She's also spent the past several years working as program director for the Poetry Project at St. Mark's Church. Her books include House Envy of All the World, which is published by Factory School in 2010. Factory School is one of these small presses that put out a cluster of really terrific books for a few years, and is worth looking up for the entirety of that catalog, too. Of Being Dispersed, Future Poem 2016, the chapbooks Dolly and Unrest, and most recently, in fact, hot off the presses, as they say, whoever they are, Dear Angel of Death from Ugly Duckling Press's Dossier series, a book that contains recent poems and critical prose in a semi-porous way that combines political theory, the interior of the mind as a place you can't really control, the multiple pressures and pleasures and contradictions of living experience, and a desire to reform the critical, creative ground for Black writing, Black art, and Black music, and to turn around the fetters of the music as the main source for the writing, however improvisational that often intensely male space can get to be. To agree or recognize and then open up or counter. In her poetry, White tracks orders and misorders of consciousness with a beat-by-stress sonic agility that refuses to give in the compartment, even when, quote, one wishes on occasion for the relentlessness of daily living to, what? Go into retreat. And yet company and its various planes just constantly admit. Please welcome Simone White.
It's dark in here, even though it's the middle of the day. So, do
you have enough light to see?
Yeah, I do. I can see. But I'm trying to see how I'm going to see everybody or try to see everybody while I'm reading. So I think I'm just gonna read from the books, the new book, and then I'll read some of these poems that are newest. And I think I have a lot of time for reading, but I'm not gonna read for 40 minutes. That seems like too much to ask of you. And but what I am gonna do is promise that I'm gonna read through those straight in a row, which should take 10 or 12 minutes. And then I'm going to read segments of this book straight through, so that it might actually feel like a long reading, but and I'm going to also, one thing that I promised myself that I would do is that I would read the long poems in this book, so that I'm going to read straight through the poem Stingray, and I'm going to read straight through the poem Messenger, and then see what else maybe we want to hear. And then I'll get to the other ones. Stingray. Having had no proper family name, I made do with Stingray, never loved a man so called. For more than a generation, black and white suffer nameless conditions, instigated by the father's line of nobody, murmurs to the baby, good night, nobody. There is no longer any way to count beneath the highways of the eastern seaboard, above the Mason-Dixon line, underlie so many crossings. What to me the arched wing of a black stingray, who think weeping over her vicious mouth, somnolent practice of stuck terror of the wave, is stingray the atomic principle of giantism, make my whole mouth move around the fire, make the fire everywhere or cold, on this street stingray where a man thinking his boat, beauty knowing monies or leather, white leather, feeling, however, the killing power of the great sea monster, her haunch whip a think acquired as a gorgeous capital. Wait and sting, why Odysseus, always in trouble with the one-eyed? What caused his love of lake demons? Her gauze wimple under black-lit stars, his very early anticipation of the right guitar sound, its fullness, no reunion of the ocean and the desert, just reflect on the history of the house. 57 rays die in Chicago. For want of so lush a malapropism, I wait a long time outside the ocean, and your body, sometimes nothing of images, dead brown and such, like luminous captivity of the dead, repeated back to our obsessional contemporary, says back a weird lie, when inside me a bit of God comes out your mouth, as the command to feel you. What, kind creature, will you take me from being to what? Her mallow glamour warns, warmed in the glowering ripple light. This liquid, this death to you. Lady, come under this death, it is ablaze. In its blue-white perfection, hold your hand like a cup. Water light will pour you into the whole day, the deafening memory of your 10th year occurring in the space between sunup and sundown, on a plot the size of an hibiscus flower, you, miss. The bicentennial was yesterday, right queer and muggy, apparently evening. Every minute the declaration must be signed, firework on the barge child mind, to which no superfund has yet gently repaired. Get me a stingray the color of slate, a little girl's switchblade, the horizon of which is an arc. Gutter oil slick Delaware, that horizon. Is New Jersey a plot? Her shore. Farms send blueberries and war. In this form, it is impossible to be together. It is being nothing at all, then cast in this court trick, vulvar form. Oh, clamped, then, between together and nothing. Forms of sand, coarse, pink, edible. No seams along which to break. A black flag waves in hot wind. Form of formless. A craft appears. Materialized hot gas. Raucous to suspend life outside of life. Shadows beyond wishing and male news and plotted to hover. No wools or porcelain anywhere in sight of the flat-class stingray. Vanity's pool, heteronymous in the tight grate. Withdraw from earth one fractal initially. Retreat, then, the slick thing quavered. She said of sediment rustling abashed, contemplation of stones rushing together under the fresh lake, not the elementary bite of capital. Give, that is a wound, and she, raw, bloodless, could you bleed, housed, gowned, fucked in a prehistoric manner, still sea monster. The very source or the veil, complete silence, the silent inhalation or stopped time, time being unmet, totally unregulated, slack and unreturned, threshing the DNA then, she becomes another one. State. It is a fish, it is a whale. The only food I have eaten is from the floor, does not from the floor. Sorry. It is a fish, it is a whale. The only food I have eaten is from the floor, as not from the floor. The wicked carport, it is hell, it is hopscotch. It is a gash, it is forever falling on your right knee. It is smooth, it is white and glossy with pure bright blood. It shines on the lip of a milk-sated infant, soft like a kitten, white kitten, soft baby. It is a fish, it is a whale, it is cold. It wants to be touched, like you. It is soft. You cannot imagine. Imagine, I am saying, do it. Fish, whale, ship. Caducity, the falseness of TV, the food I could still eat in Casablanca. It is a truck, it is a grain, it is a fish, it is a whale, it is a garbage truck. The only word I know is garbage. Ice cream, gorilla. You are, baby. The fish, the whale, the skylark. You, 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 you. You have, it is, the naturalized beast, the scar. We are, it is, soft. Do it. I am telling you. I announce, it is. Of the long poem, I had said there could be a secret text, a sacred accompanying text, unreadable, but for its having been written and erased. But how to establish secrecy? Not undiscovered, nor buried, then unearthed. Its paradigm is the burning bush, psychosis materielle, madness of cause. There must, I'm saying, be a listener, also mad, ready with testimony to extinguish doubt. There must be witness and whispering, and uncreated objects that have not been touched except by these two. The primary position taken by me as against the secondary position, the backward, the prone, that is the point. The point being to run down the arbiters of licensing with a demand for pictures. Show me an image of your perfect listener, deep sound, trash musicality, folklore of the herd, remnant of the flightlessly flapped wing. I forbid pathos and contrast. Forbid that too, me in the primary position. I never read this poem. I don't know why I don't read it, so I'm just gonna read it. It's called Love Poem. You tell me how fucked up you are, as if my secret were not general drift, impartial or limited attention on the spectrum of whole attention or love in the way I had hoped. This symptom or failure is ongoing, even now wounding myself as another separation begins. Turning back to keep a simple measure, to accurately say the cost this kind of womanhood whose longing is not to be made stupid in its face, as could be implied, alors, this woman in her prom dress on the subway like that lives for you in the measure of stone's distance from the fully built. I write in secret to extend the attention for channeling, going on without recourse to interpretable phrases, Games such as Pinochle are attention in retreat. Secrecy shreds attention, makes for it unlikely perforations, so little gasps illustrate folding, one word over another, one is inside the other's attention or conceptual field. You bring attention inside, in the way of, by way of secreting in a dump motel where everyone would be looking but for the proliferation of dumps, your key witness. So this poem, Messenger, is, it's not that it requires like a lot of explanation or anything, it's just that it draws some actual words and phrases from Agamben's The Time That Remains, which kind of takes over the last section of this, the poetry section of this book, and begins to speak in, begins to speak. And there's an epigraph from Ephesians 1:10. All things are recapitulated in him, things in heaven and things on earth. Messenger. Prepare, no night creature, accidental enemy. Encounters return to us in witch cradles, monsters by a hair's breadth. These are works melted, no accident, these fires, these crashes, capitulate to what is meant by the past as a whole. Melt, fall back into accomplishment, the grasp of who prepares to give the message. The side is excruciating, we find him there pained, not knowing, and the curt blast come to him as a side, as from the original side, ripped from the first man, eaten by the merciless blank. I find your cries ridiculous. The side is all magma. It is where we are taken to get what is coming. In the middle of our conversation, the phone rang. It was you from the other side. I rang through. It was you calling from the other side. I staggered. It was you laughing. You were interrupting the progress of our conversation. You were laughing. There was thus no middle. There was the connection which loomed in its oddness being duplicated in all the realities where it was taking place. The laughter was warm. It reminded me of body heat. It was pure energy. It was you from the other side ringing through. It was you pressing your finger to the hollow of my throat. Processing, the summation of all things that transpire, all dust not equally black, black rocks, diamonds whirling afloat synthy lag, not the organic wave. That is a thing to resemble absurdly, taking the form of what it is not, for it is never the water, it is never the sound, it is never the light. Gruesome Nosferatu spreads its claw over the light, its spine curves, that wave, misshapen, jealous, curled Saturday, my sense, piteously not yet messenger. These are works, now being merciless, being crushed as a matter of criticism into non-specific talk of waves, the little irresponsible pedals. Those snares when trap music got hot, the illusion of bending the strings or processing. At the sight of the miraculous, the idea was to rebuild that sound on the synths, to recapitulate the past happening inside the body of deliverance, pull the field into what's still, what suffers future arrivals. This nowness I inhabit is a gift. I am the woman of your first maturity. It was a woman, it was a child with the sex of a man. She spoke the words of the dead, gusts, her black lips closed. He, I, crouched. We cannot write. Your night messages fucked me up. You arrested discovery of any kind. Your body's nearness interrupts all dreaming. The woman was loud. She was impossible to hear without opening the possibility of hearing at the event of its first uncurling. In the clenched ear of a wet newborn, the form that instructs us in hearing's plasticity, sculptural ear of time, its, her, the woman's voice, broke over the figures. She kept repeating, I am the woman, to the figures differentiating digitally in the dark of her making. at once projections of the arch joke of human dwelling together in this nothing, and provocations. The messenger seethed, artless servant of this place. Eugelos addresses the mother with no mate, the mother who panics, the mother who watches the others with dread and wonder, the careless pleasure of other mothers in the presence of their children, the hours spent in fear, the isolation of motherhood, the metempsychotic deprivation of sleep. Nothing you have is yours, not even deposits of fat. You are the nothing toward which the man nods in acknowledgement of your motherhood, which is grand, which is prostration, which is the deactivation of all known powers, which is the evacuation of power, your share in the speechless condition of your baby. Speech rushes, you freeze in the weakness of joint potentiality. You cannot share, yet you share. You have no faith, yet you must have faith. This is a test, this is not a test. A test, everything that was has been evacuated in your arms. Someone has fainted, someone's got a mote in her eye. Someone is pricked by Eugelos, hunter. We cannot write if time stops. All the industrial deviltry, clockwork such as normal, proves nothing. Barbarians, curatorial possibilities involving depth, involving cutting tools, the mighty, magic, deaths opposite these are losses, flashing intimately courtside, wealth and black excellence taking place as a magnitude of economic pornography. Ceaseless Negro apocalypse, it never comes. Yet the despicable enjoy a beautiful invisibility. What rains upon them? Dollar bills, shit on tiny, tiny wings. You know the little the wings, the emoji, the wings emoji. Her I never tell anybody that that's what the shit on tiny wings is. Her cattle pigeon behind a new economic edifice, secure in its statement of miniaturized state logics. Open your mouth. Whose mother are you? Get out of here. The men cannot write. You are not a man. You have never been anything but this image of the end, not the end. There are no saints. There is between us whisper, night, hunger, indeterminacy, monies. Scratch it down, I command you. Be or come or don't. Resist if you want, the absolute indeterminacy between inside and outside, loathing both earth and sky and everybody else getting in on it. This is not your first time, said the woman, the light tread of masculine youth, glide upon his skateboard, a complex organization threatening to lift itself so outside physics. Dismount the thing, wielding it in one hand like a weapon, everybody get in on it. No, just me. It's me who wants in on it. Not the first time between yourselves, down there. Imagine next, alongside his joy, how to listen to the body of a black man in flight. He is always about to knock somebody out. The joy between yourselves, flight, Michael, several decades converge with the value of having no body fat. I too have wanted this power, said the woman. I too invent the mercies of being within and without the Maghreb, the Carolinas, and the West Coast. Processing our works, being births inseparable from desire for him. Love has no reason. She, I, now, was on her back. She was counting. A penetrating numerical hum through her. All these churches. Sacred music was the condition of possibility for sacred music. Imagine what was now possible. This with a half smile, the half smile of a woman who commands the silent rock. So these are these? These are, so they've recently been published under the title On Being the Other Woman. So that's their title. And I mean, the thing about this is that, like, I suspect that this could go on, like, for kind of a long time. But it requires, like, so it requires, though, like, this is what I'm thinking about them, that they require a kind of, like, subtlety that I'm not always capable of. So it's a little bit of a starting and stopping project, because even though, like I was just saying in caucus, that I had figured that these were not poems that wanted any kind of, like, figurative language or metaphors in them, I was thinking of like a kind of throwback to like an identitarian feminism that insisted on, like, the daily life being more important than literary history or something like that. But they have a lot of requirements. It turns out, like, the poems actually have a lot of formal requirements that we can talk about, or that I'm trying to figure out as they get written. So I'm going to read them. How much time have I been reading for? Like 15 minutes? 4 minutes. 4 minutes. She's trying to trick me into being like Bernadette Mayer or something. Heaped, therefore residually heaped, beside myself on the bed, next I fetch my son's pretzels. But prerogative lingers, upended, could power's lengths also belittle me. Between your visits am I belittled, am I less pure? Semiologist pressed me toward an apparent residue, crowning, evident, or almost. We go to the room for stories, nestled, lumped or thrown together, we and things, for very little children. Camden worrying a raised benefit, engineered, a loop, a figure 8, an on-ramp, a mother hacking for Uber, pink, and the tiny pitchfork he and I discover in the side of some plastic grass, an instrument's use bears a direct relation to our activity in observing its constructed unpile. Monitoring a stink bug's progress, or beautiful random application of remorseless violence, there. My boy has begun to apprehend such concepts as affection, better identified as interested longing. Does this one like me? Maybe he doesn't like me. Look, the bug. Windy, undifferentiated consonants, unsorted words please me so. One day I will tell how much time there was before he could evoke in me anything like interest. His thought interests me. I date from discussion of the need to use a pot or toilet for shit. In a few days, I would fall into a rage on the street, arguing with my mother on the telephone. What makes me if her desire vibrates as pleading packed in insult? In my guise as woman, work, and insomnia rumble through, they are girders, money worries girding my whole body, such job interviews, saying intolerable kinds of nothing about how all of it came to pass. Is this about money? My inability to pass into the moneyed upper middle class to which I had been raised, projected. One thinks one has refused. I really hate liberals. I do not like to hear the troubles of middle-class persons fussing about their children's use of cell phones. What if I misdirect or misuse what I now know about the feminine crucible? My boy inquires about my anger, somehow knows it is for, against something not him at all, just wants to know what. You don't like Eli? No, I like him, I'm sorry. Mostly, I have been able to decide what aspects of my own potency my child will witness. When I break ties with men or refuse to keep with the tradition of fungibility, insofar as my action is a lump of mass action or it is insanity, such as to choose to act precisely in emotional ways. The emotions are the cortex of reason. Then my heart tells me the way, as there is no way. My boy and I rely on media to keep me strong enough to love. I like science fiction because something terrible is going to happen. Suppose it is the ocean under this Boeing, belching white, whatever you say, Mommy. Okay. Oceanic will come over all these very rich, their big boats, houses, and so on, will come over all this mess. See, reality, instead turn over tones of words ending in ul that lose their significance and exactitude within seconds. A casualty of brain injury and exhaustion both is memory loss. You split open part of your head and for 6 months repeated words you had already said, but I didn't say anything out of delicacy or tenderness or timidity. I didn't say, why the fuck are you still working? What possible conditions could exist that require you to work without shelter while your brain swells? Who is your wife? Come home, the terrible thing. Du Bois teaches radicalization is possible. Adolescent boys living temporarily in my home, one like my own child, my brother's son. These words might have meaning for someone reading, like my own child. Regard it as an undifferentiated space in which to pile expensive junk reeking of petrochemical deodorizers. Losing track of devices, they need all these power sources and stations to connect. My need for certain kinds of privacy, tidiness, results in occasional inability to share personal space, surely related to believing that I am pursued or overrun by half-eaten food, empty water glasses, bits of poop lining the rim of the toilet seat. At some point, cleaning a toilet seat, I'm like, is pee corrosive? Unmatched socks of others I must compulsorily clean up. In early life, among loud, not gentle, numerous family of origin, later, the men with whom I shared my homes, each deeply silent, somewhat still. I'm not revolted by evidence of the lived lives of other people. Effective means of housekeeping categorically interest me. The pleasures of a clean, orderly house. There are few absolute pleasures. As my life gradually became too busy to properly clean my own home, I paid another woman to clean. Patricia cleans my house now, even while I am away working in another town. She watches so the boys don't harm anything they have not been warned not to harm. The fight with my mother about the boys' occupation. I negotiated a decent rate of pay in a tenure-track job at the University of Pennsylvania. More than one person in my family accused me of being angry and frustrated in the space of 1 week, but I feel saner and more fulfilled than ever. Height of my emotional power. For a week, I shared my bed with my son. We arranged for 5 days together in 2 cities, not New York, after many months. My ex-husband made taunting sounds at me in my house in front of my child while I kept eating a piece of pizza and waited for him to leave. I received the first copies of my new book. Don't try to explain that I've changed. I don't feel much when people call me names or the functional equivalent. Miserable, delusional, immoral. I have things, a sense of things that belong to me, that I have clung to, such as an apartment. Possessions, while they are not a mathematical index, can focus the instincts and point toward what must be sacrificed. These 5 tones, race-femmered, emit a melodic noise I've never heard anywhere. Sway Lee is a composer prince of melancholy being related to sex and money, which way it slants. Overtop each outcry, you could repeat once more the urgently communicable passions of us. The only thing I can think of like it is the emoji that shows the silly face lean toward the left, laughing and crying. Belief in the single primary nature of space-time falls therefore out of its place, drops off comically in a drool. Comedy is thus cruel regarding the dual opportunities presented by catastrophe, such as stroke. Every time Juicy J shows up on a track now, there's some comedy in it. Viz, you say no to ratchet pussy, Juicy J can't. I ran for 45 minutes. Concurrently, I worked out a pretty nuanced system for talking about power glide. Trap has developed as a means figuratively to represent in and beyond words, ooh, 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 an emotional notation system for desire in our lifetime, one specifically attuned to the horror whiteness performs in the presence of black men. The absolute goal of U.S. sociality is to securitize interior persons and monies against the threat of the aliveness of them, which is not lost on anybody. Let them speak for themselves. What means, therefore, to recall very precisely how pussy pops, or why would pop for you? Why is this funny? Trying to think of a poetic instance outside lesbian feminism. I always put my pussy in the middle of trees, like a waterfall, like a doorway to God. Outside the figure also outside a system of diamonds or gold teeth or strippers or rapturous marriage. I cannot think of a single poem. Someone else will know and write to me in disgust, using language to say, when at last I am with you again, and you begin to press yourself inside me, an inch or two at a time, I am so relieved not to be myself, and never want to be myself again, and have felt grateful for all the ways I have aged. My vagina has aged. All of me seems to have lived up to now as pathway for what passes through us. I have used this music, its metaphorical aliveness, as a proxy for the unbearable ways my body declares itself irrepressible or central to anything that is. I think about the ways this might be wrong, or how, Dag asks, to think an ethical way of being in relation to the black men I know and do not. I continue to fail to propose to the New York Times an essay on the role Meek Mill has played in this, if this could be a way of activating others to refuse the possibility of incarceration for living. I have become misaligned or crooked with respect to the field of dependency, basically a free radical. If I keep looking at the word independent, I can see it surrounded by practices of sex work. It is always pussy that gives me value, and this fact of undeniable facticity must also enter my estimation of the state of my own excess. The forms my life take have berserk intensity, dissolute facticity. Whatever means I use to accomplish liberation will inevitably lead to the destruction of someone's marriage. That's true. You rail against men. My lover writes to me, we use an encrypted form of digital messaging as if anyone cares what we say to one another. Certainly, I do not believe that anyone does, but these are his wishes. Men, as they exist in their bodies, are not the subject of my interest, so I do not rail against them. That is a misrepresentation of the whole of my aesthetic and phenomenological project, which involves taking up the vision I have been given of my own freedom. I have been given a vision of it, life beyond use. The white women who own the fancy nail salon I go to fired the manager I loved, a black woman photographer who treated me with professional respect for my time, my lack of it. She knew my work and the work of my sister. She let me use my paid-for seat as a place to weep behind the screen of her conversation, using herself as a blessed covering for me. I realized, those bitches don't want me in here. I understood I had witnessed an act of aggression against our presence, our desire to be adorned, to have comforts, to cultivate the rot of this corruptible, all its deathy glory. The nigger woman is the mistress of the world, optimal dependency being a flowering of sexual and other forms of competition. Just stand here?
Anybody wants to?
Does anybody want to talk about this? Do people usually want to talk about this?
Yeah, but it takes a few minutes.
It takes a while.
Simone, how long did you, the last piece you read, from the time that you started that, from the time that the book was published, was there a reshifting in your stance that got you started on that?
The very last thing.
Yeah.
What was the time between the finishing of this book and the? Oh, well, I didn't write poems for a long time because I was working on concluding the prose part of that book, and I think the poems that are in the book I finished Messenger in like January of 2017, I think. and stopped writing poetry for a long time. And then I don't think I didn't start those poems until early this year. So a long time. Maybe a few things in between, but nothing that would have like continued. Like almost a complete break.
Can you say what made you make that shift in the voice space in the poem? Do you know what the components of that shift are? Not that it's a permanent shift necessarily.
I'm sure it's not a permanent shift. I guess I talked a little bit about this in caucus, just that it was really hard for me to say anything when I was writing the poems in the beginning of Dear Angel. And it was even hard for me to sort of recognize some of those as poems, because it felt like I was just trying to get words out, just any words. And I was so depressed and so angry. But I recognized that there are different kinds of poems in there, first of all. So the Stingray and Messenger are very much related to each other and in the same voice, I would say. And then, so those poems, I think, really were coming from a place of, that felt like they needed to be dictated from another space or something like that. That really felt that it was coming from a deep and inaccessible place that was actually multi-sourced, that I wasn't the only speaking voice there. And in that way, I mean, the poems do have like a kind of trans-historical form, and they, especially Stingray, which I kind of like in retrospect. Messenger is just too personal to have I don't have any feelings about it except that it's there. But Stingray, I'm kind of like, yeah, like if somebody was like, write a poem, I might write that thing, right? Like it seemed like it actually did the things that I meant for it to do. Like it was able to sort of locate itself in the physical space that I wanted it to locate itself in, which was home, Philadelphia, the East Coast. And I don't know if I've told the story maybe before, but the Stingray is actually the car Stingray, most importantly, the Stingray, which sort of stimulates the title of the poem, was driving home with Isaac in the backseat. He must have been about 7 or 8 months old, alone, and I saw a boat coming back from the Jersey Shore that was like a white fancy speedboat that said Stingray on the side, and I was like, oh, well, that's the title of the poem. Which hadn't been written there, not a word of the poem had come to pass, but I knew that was the title of whatever it was that needed to come next. So that, it really was it was sourced from a different location in my mind and experience, and had a long reach of what I wanted to access. I mean, Messenger obviously takes place in a kind of in the space of messianic space. And then these take place today. I mean, they just take place in the daily activities of my life, and I meant for them to be articulated from a very, very instantaneous place, even though I don't mean for them to resemble anything like day books or diaries, because I'm trying to write down emotional positions that are unfamiliar to me. Yeah. And so.
So I'm wondering about the composition of that work in relation to what you were saying, and on the level of something like, because you mentioned in caucus that things were being typed up on your phone and
Mhm.
on the computer, and materials coming in from different places at different times. So like the time of the material is really various, but then the time of the poem is continuous in this way when you're reading it,
Mhm.
or when I'm reading it. You know, on the page there are these sections, and you can kind of see where certain breaks might be happening. But I'm just wondering if there's a way to talk about how you figure out where the places are that those different kinds of thoughts that you wouldn't normally put together maybe previously, like where they connect and how you work that through, and how much of that is conscious and how much of that is kind of feeling it out by listening to it.
Like in terms of the premeditated nature of the sections, or how like complete it can be in any one sitting, just like because of the reality of like the fact that I just don't have that much time. In a sitting, I can only do so much, and these are hard to complete outside of one sitting because I get lost in the emotional complexity and I can't remember it. So it's important to get out a section. But in order to sort of prepare to do a section, it might take a while because so there's a section which I didn't read that's about magnetism, or like a physical, I had this idea that there was an actual kind of sense of plates being rotated against one another, and that this was actually what gender difference was, that there was a magnetic friction, right, which could never actually achieve touching. But it took me like weeks to figure out how to approach it in the poem, even though I had the sensation or the like emotional sense of what I was getting at. I didn't have any approach. And so I kind of wait for an approach to take shape, and then I wait until I have a moment long enough, sometimes like a day, even though it doesn't take a day to write a section. I do need like not to have to like wipe anybody's butt or whatever. So it's like, I do. So I do a lot of butt wiping. So yeah, I mean, my life is I cannot work in the daily space of taking care of my 3.5-year-old son. I just can't. And so I don't feel bad about it. You know what I mean? Like, he has needs that are going to change consistently. But right now, the space of working is often when I'm away, or I don't work late at night because I'm asleep at night. I do sometimes work very, very early in the morning if I can. But so it's about recognizing, frankly, the states of mind that can be used for work. And also like, I do think I might have a complete sense of what the concept that I'm trying to transcribe might be before I sit down to do it. I don't know what it's going to say, but I have like a conceptual framework.
I guess connected to that, in the interview with Andy, with the LA review of books, you're talking about Stingray, and you're talking about how that question of like how to fall in love again is asked, but subterranean, like it's not asked in the poem.
In which one, Stingray?
In Stingray, but it is, and I really liked thinking about that subterranean kind of quality, pushing it through, like the I that you can't really control. But so I guess like when do you it sounds like you're saying you identify that question beforehand, and you're like, all right, here I am asking that question, and you don't know what you'll say, sure, but you know you're addressing that question, that lineage of questioning from like McKittrick to, or are you writing and then you're like, oh, look, here's this question.
I discover new things to write about when I'm in the space of actually writing stuff, that's for sure. But I think what I'm talking about is like, in order to get any writing done, and not be panicked about the fact that like maybe I would never ever do it, is that like first of all, like I have confidence that there is a place in my mind which is left for poetry, like that belongs to that, and that I can return to that place. But so a lot of the activities that go on in like that part of the brain, it's okay if they rest there, or just kind of like, they can be eventful without like actually writing sessions taking place, I think is what I'm trying to say. So it may be that a lot of events take place in there before I can get to the place where I'm trying things out or able to, really get into the thorny business of what is going to come up in the writing session, so that I can go one way or another. The thing actually has words to match whatever sensations or questions I've like initially set out.
I'm not really exactly clear what my question is, but I want to maybe hear you talk a little bit more about, like when we were in caucus toward the beginning, you talked about kind of the punishment for of a feminine experience, whether artistic or intellectual, or and it makes me think about there's violence that's like real, I guess, in the world violence, and then there's violence, right, with like lack of communication or small misogynies or just intimacies that like don't connect, and so I'm just trying to think about that along with some of the language you use today in terms of sort of taking up a vision of independence, which I think about as like a different vision or something, or misusing of the feminine crucible, like just kind of what does, I'm trying to make a question now, what does, if we're thinking about sort of a different way of sort of feminist poetics, perhaps, and then we're thinking about like, so there's punishment sort of staying, and there's punishment acting, and so sort of how does that feel? Or am I making any sense? Or
I think so.
You can respond to, yeah. I mean, feel in terms of like the writing and also the being.
I mean, maybe it'd be helpful just to say what I mean when I say punishment. I guess what I'm thinking about is the ways in which one thinks you have stepped outside of the boundaries of certain, or made some kind of refusal.
Right.
And you find that you didn't consider what the price was of that refusal, perhaps thoroughly. And I don't mean, my auntie will not, think it's nice if I get divorced. That's not what I'm talking about. I mean having to negotiate with people who you are close to and respect. The choices that you've made, whether that means, this fundamentally relates actually like to the choice to delay for me getting myself involved in poetry or writing at all as a life, because my initial sort of introduction or warning about this was, you will be alone, you will be broke, right? Turns out I'm alone and broke. So, I kind of like it. But I love my life, but I am in fact without a partner and pretty broke. And I think, what are people trying to say when they say those things? I think what they're trying to say is you will find yourself without certain patriarchal protections. You may find yourself, in a position where you are exposed outside the benefits of bourgeois femininity and marriage in ways that you do not expect, and you'll be challenged in that exposure in ways that you did not expect. And I think that that's happened in lots of ways that I don't want to talk about. But, you know, I mean, first of all, you know, it's like single motherhood is actually like not that extraordinary. You know, it's not extraordinary in my own family, you know, I mean, it's not that rare. And my son does have a parent who's not me. But the economic structure of two-parent families that people seem to expect me to be involved in, that's not what's happening. And so, you know, what does that look like in terms of one's desires, one's capacity to go on, one's burdens, one's pleasures? What does it mean to, I mean, this is what I'm saying when I say that I don't have that much time to work. Sometimes I think, you know, when I think about people who I'm like, how do they get so much work done? And I'm like, oh, somebody else must make them dinner or something. You know what I mean? Like, there's literally no service. I don't get serviced, ever. And so, what does that mean in terms of basic capacities to do or not do certain things? And I feel like that's a conversation that is almost absent from contemporary art production for women, which is shocking. And it's also shocking that, I don't know, that the expectation that there is a man who pays my bills is so pervasive in every aspect of my encounters that it is almost impossible for me to have a conversation about the economic realities that I experience, because there's so little language around the understanding of what my life as an intellectual might look like without like orthodox patriarchal supports. There's just like so little understanding of it, except as abjection. And you're like, so thus the the poems. And also, you know, forms of punishment. You know, it's like, you know, one of my, I'll tell you this story, I don't mind talking about this. This is one of my very, very closest friends who is, I mean, I would not in any way describe as a traditionalist in any respect. Any respect. She's lived much of her adult life in like monasteries in Japan. But a Black woman from Oakland. Right? So like, you know, somebody with whom I share lots of demographic similarity. You know, conversations about, so the other woman thing is like both real and unreal, right? It's like both the actual condition of being in a relationship with someone who's also in a relationship with someone else, and also just other woman. It's all those things. And so what is the capacity to talk about the daily experience of having a relationship that really does not fit into the sort of like ordinary arrangements of, you know, expectation for me? You know, that there's a sense in which my existence for people as a free and independent person requires also that I participate in certain structures that I've already rejected. And so it's very confusing as to how people think that I'm supposed to achieve certain kinds of happinesses. And I wonder what, I have no idea how to be in conversation with someone I love very much, like a close friend who has never been anything, but I mean, like, this is a person who you're like, I'm really in trouble, I need you to come get me. Who comes to get me, right? Like, how do I have a conversation with that person about my choices? And that's part of what this project is also. It's like, you know, trying to explore some of the things that we talked about in caucus, about the complexities of the pleasures that we actually experience. Without resorting to, you know, without resorting to pre-existing language. Like, okay, like, you know, like single motherhood, not that extraordinary. Also, people who are married to other people, who have sex with other people, not that extraordinary, right? So you're like, what? Like, it's really, like, it's mind-blowing, mind-blowing.
So does this friend of yours who spends her life in monasteries take a dim view of your choices at the moment? Is that what you're saying?
Who doesn't take a dim view of my choices, any of them?
I
I mean, there's literally no one in my life who approves of any choice that I've made in the last 10 years. So I don't know. Like, I'm not joking. My friends are lovely. But, you know, like the existing family structure, zero comprehension, right? There's dim view is, you know, I wouldn't put it that way. I mean, in an effort to try to assist me in realizing my full potential as a human being, you know, people try to love you, but they love you in ways that are oppressive.
I would have said inaccurate.
Okay. Yeah.
Hi. I guess I'm wondering, I'm kind of wondering about, in the creation of a piece of art, it starts to take form.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if you could talk about your experience of, this is kind of two parts. One is like, are there certain kind of psychic intellectual materials that you can articulate that take certain other forms, that take form in certain ways, like something that becomes a long skinny poem, something that becomes like a prose poem, or a poem that works in kind of sentence structure versus kind of a litany, or more sonically, you know. So I'm kind of curious about that, but also like the experience in constructing a thing. Do you find that you're more often, you have a thing, you're trying to articulate it, or you're in the poem or in the piece of writing and you're actually kind of haptically, in some sense, constructing and finding it by the use, by the practice? So it's kind of two questions.
I like the way you put the second part, which is that yes, once you're inside the thing, you are kind of haptically constructing, and you just sensing your way through it, and also knowing that, you know, what your aims are, and, you know, you do have a kind of ideology of language that is either supporting you or that you're working against with, you know, intention or not.
So that's something you feel is a kind of dissonance, almost.
I think so. So that
Sometimes.
you have the capacity or materials that you have to work with in terms of your own intellectual capacities, and then you have what is outside you and what you know about the history of the work that you are most interested in. So whatever that means, whatever your art world is, you have that as a kind of dissonance, right? But the other question is like really, this is a hard question to answer, but it's also the thing that I probably think about most actively, which is how do I get into the space of making each individual poem that it requires. So, you know, like, how do I find the form for each thing? And I marvel at people who are more experimental openly, like Anselm, who you know, is like, I'm gonna make some things that'll look like boxes. You know, like, I don't know how Anselm arrived at that, but I imagine through trial and error, right?
I
Can you
arrived
say?
at that because I was living with babies and had no time.
There you
and
go.
discovered I could write fast and repeat.
That's how babies do a lot of things. So yeah, it's like, how can you get anything on the page, first of all, and then, or whatever, into what form, but then also, like, I mean, I don't know what the process is that connects those things in my own mind, but I know that there is one. There are ideas, and those ideas require something of me in order to get them into a physical form that can relay some of the energy that I'm trying to communicate. And so what happens when there's only one word, you know, and then another word, and then another word? Well, you go kind of slow, right? Or, you know, how do you give the impression that everything's happening at once? Or how do you convey accident? How do you, you know, how do you convey, anything? And typesetting is you know, is more. When I was teaching at Iowa last semester, I was like really amazed by the inventiveness of those students with type and the ways in which they had really completely exceeded the limitations of any word processing. You know, they just thought far beyond the limits of the typewriter, you know, and had naturalized all kinds of possibilities that exist in stuff like InDesign, you know, so that they were coming to the idea of the form or physical shape of the poem with a very, very different initial notion of what was possible. So I would see tons of text overlays and lots of Xeroxing and lots of all kinds of stuff, which I think, you know, those of us who did not come into the world or learn those forms of you know, typesetting, we think different, you know. So in a way, I'm still limited to the sort of like the possibilities of the typewriter and the word processor, and you know, people grow, but I do think that I'm wired to understand a certain kind of possibility on imprint. And so I think in those terms, what's possible in
Hi. I have a question about sort of like the editing, or maybe more so like the putting together of. I sort of see like a lot of strands or moments of like recording thought in a fleeting moment, and then those moments are very valuable. And sometimes within my own writing practice, I can only like write a text to myself or something, or it's on Google Docs, or it's on a notebook, or it's like in a word processor. And then sort of there's this fragmented constellation of different moments everywhere. And then I was wondering if like the same sort of disorganization happens within your own work, and then if there's any strategies that sort of, or time set aside, or anything that creatively makes it not less of a task, but more of like a, I don't know, thing to pull it together, or
That's such a good question.
Yeah.
I think you probably answer your own question better than I can answer it. I mean, what would work for you is not the same as what will work for me because our brains are different. But like what you said about, you know, having something in Google Docs and having something over here and you lost it and you found it over here, and you know, that's maybe that's part of what your work is. You know, that how could you show, the work is to think about how to show the strands of disconnection, or to think about the ways in which your thought process is being recorded, and that is it. And so if your goal is to show what your thought process is, how could you show in a single space or what you're describing to me? And yeah, that's for you to answer. I'm a little bit of a completist. So, you know, for me, like I read books from beginning to end, you know, like I don't skim or anything. So, you know, for me, I can't always complete a thing right, but I can, I don't know, like I can locate the thing in a single location in like a little box in my brain or something like that.
Do you revise a lot or not?
Not much, I mean, but the process of composition is also, I don't keep every word that goes onto the page either. So because I usually work on a computer, or now a phone, the
adjusting goes
the
very-
adjusting goes very, and is sometimes lost.
Uh-huh.
So, you know, it's a hard thing to figure out now what it really means to have
Right.
versions of a poem.
Right.
You actually have to print out the versions.
I actually have two questions, but first I would like to thank you. I mean, the reading was very beautiful to hear, and I think that I can stay here for hours and just listen to you reading these poems. My first question is, I write a lot in Arabic, and I do write a lot when I'm in a certain emotional state of mind or state of soul or something. And I usually have lots of difficulties to write when I'm asked to, or when I have a certain task, or when I'm like assigning myself a certain task. So I'm wondering if you have any advice for that. And my second question is, for people who write a very personal stuff, and like memoir or poems, and in your case, like it felt very personal. How do you deal with the idea of being? I'm not sure if I'm using the right words, but like vulnerable and talking about the poems, or speaking, or just putting the poems out to the audience, and then having to discuss them and basically open up to people. So my question is, how do you deal with that?
Well, your first question is, so I don't mean to get the impression that I'm writing when I'm like inspired. I'm not always. It's more like sessions being opened. But I always believed that I was terrible at responding to any kind of instructions, like just because I was perverse, so that if someone told me to do it, I wouldn't do it. But it turned out when I was just starting to think about writing, and I was in an MFA program, I enjoyed all of the assignments so much, and it was a real revelation for me that I could be receptive to instruction in that way, and that I could use those assignments for myself, not as, you know, not as ways to fight anybody, but as a way to just to use them really for my own self. So it's like, it's still you. in the moment that you are being asked to do something. People are asking, I think, for they're asking for you to transfer your pre-existing inspirations to another context. That's all. And people who give great writing assignments, I was really lucky to study with Wayne Kestenbaum when I was in graduate school, who was like an incredible inventor of writing assignments. And I just loved them. I never said no, because I trusted that his assignments would yield something. So it is a matter of respect and trust a little bit, but I also am real careful about who I take instruction from, so that's maybe one thing to think about. The other thing about vulnerability, should I open the door? So like in both Stingray and Messenger, the objects, like the lovers in those poems, are totally repressed. They're not really there. And I think that fact made it, I felt okay writing the poems because I didn't feel that I was exposing myself or others. I also don't, I mean, stuff about sex and stuff, like, I don't know, I just don't feel that embarrassed about sex. That's just one of those things that you have to have a level of threshold of comfort with. Also, in terms of personal stuff, I don't actually think I've told you anything personal. I've described, some of the circumstances of my life in general terms, right? But I haven't, and in the poems I am interested in real, or as close as I can to describing certain kinds of socio-emotional dilemmas or something like that. But I'm not interested in confessing, and I'm not interested in exposure, because I know that there are consequences for those things that I don't want to expose myself to, or other people to. So, I mean, I think the super general basic advice that I was given by nobody other than Robert Polito was like, never tell anybody anything you don't want them to know. Just keep it to yourself if you don't want people to know about it. And I don't tell people things that I don't want them to know. I reveal those things that I think are useful to my work, and that's it. Which isn't to say that I try to give like a shined up picture or anything, but there is such a thing as privacy, and I believe in privacy. I believe in protecting people who are close to me.
Maybe we should give you some respite now.
Thank you very much. I really